This is Euronews Tonight, and here are the headlines. Scenes of complete destruction in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv, as Russian forces continue to use heavy weaponry to try and take the city. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the latest so-called humanitarian corridors offered by Russia are immoral, as they mainly lead into Belarus and Russia. The EU will assess Ukraine's bid for membership alongside those from Moldova and Georgia in the coming days, as the bloc looks at cutting its dependence on Russian oil and gas.
Netflix and TikTok are the latest to suspend operations in Russia. Here in the Cube, we'll have more on the online information war.
Good evening, welcome to the program. I'm Per Bergfors Nyberg. Fierce fighting continues across Ukraine tonight, but the government insists that Kharkiv and the capital Kyiv remain under its control. Sustained shelling in Kyiv suburbs disrupted evacuation efforts and laid waste to a residential building in what one Ukrainian official described as a catastrophic situation. At least 13 people were killed following a Russian air raid on a factory on the outskirts of the capital. Now, to the east, Kharkiv remains in Ukrainian hands, but aerial bombardments have caused devastation, and reports say Russian forces have now surrounded the city. In the southeastern city of Mariupol, 2 ceasefires failed to hold over the weekend. Temporary pauses in the fighting had been agreed to allow citizens to leave via so-called humanitarian corridors. But Moscow and Kyiv accused each other of breaking the pact. An estimated 200,000 people are now caught under intense Russian shelling with no running water and little food.
Sanctions should include a boycott of Russian exports, in particular a refusal of oil and oil products from Russia. It could be called an embargo, or just a moral issue, when you refuse to give money to terrorists. Boycott imports to Russia. If they don't want to respect civilized rules, they shouldn't get goods and services from civilization.
French President Emmanuel Macron accused Moscow of moral and political cynicism. Macron's comments follow Russia's announcement that it would open evacuation routes from Ukraine, but mainly to Russia or Belarus. Macron said that Putin's promise to protect citizens was hypocritical and that ceasefires must be respected so that citizens can flee the conflict.
What we are saying is simply that humanitarian actors must be able to intervene, that there must be complete truces when they intervene, to protect the women, children and the men who need to be protected, and to be able to get them out of the conflict zone. So it is not just corridors that are immediately threatened. It is not this hypocritical speech that consists of saying, we're going to protect people and take them to Russia. It's not serious. It's moral and political cynicism.
And our correspondent, Sasha Vakulina, joins me now live here in the studio. Sasha, so we have a third round of talks taking place at the moment between Russian and Ukrainian officials. What can we expect from these talks?
Well, we are hoping that we're going to expect some sort of the humanitarian corridor again, once again. This has not changed. This has always been one of the most important things for the Ukrainians now, particularly talking about some of the cities. This is Kyiv, Mariupol, Kharkiv and Sumy. These are 4 cities where the situation is the worst. For example, when you talk about Mariupol, there is no connection there. People cannot get to call their families who are still there. They don't have any mobile network, they don't have landline, no internet. The situation in these 4 places is, for the moment, the worst. So we are hoping to get some sort of an agreement, of course, when it comes to the evacuating people from those dangerous places and also sending some humanitarian aid there to help those who cannot evacuate. Now, unfortunately, the first 2 rounds, you've seen what's been happening, even though the sides did agree in theory on those corridors, this did not happen. And some of the people who went out from their places, from their shelter to be evacuated, they were under very heavy shelling. So that's the biggest hope now, to get those people evacuated and to get them evacuated into Ukraine, not as per Russia's latest announcement that they would secure those corridors to the north, towards Belarus, and also from Kharkiv towards Russia. This is not what's going to happen. This is not something that Ukrainian government would agree upon.
So what kind of merits do this sort of third round of talks have? I mean, you mentioned those two attempts over the weekend. They failed because these ceasefires were almost immediately broken. Today, Zelensky called this new attempt as immoral because they, as you mentioned, lead into Russia. I mean, these new talks, will they actually produce anything tangible, anything concrete?
The position of the Ukrainian government and the position of the authorities in Kiev and of President Volodymyr Zelensky himself has always been the fact that we are ready to negotiate. Kiev is ready to negotiate and to sit down with the Russian delegation. Zelensky said many times he's ready to sit down one-to-one with Vladimir Putin. This is what Ukrainian side is doing. They're still negotiating. They're still trying to get through. They're still trying to find those points where they can agree on something to make at least a little bit of progress because of all those people that are now trapped in these 4 cities where the situation is the worst and elsewhere as well, because the crisis goes on, the humanitarian crisis goes on massively. And we've heard today also from the mayor of Lviv, who said that Lviv reached the limit of the capacity to help refugees displaced. Lviv is not a big city, and now the mayor, Andriy Sadovy, said that about 200,000 people were now staying in Lviv. These are the Ukrainians that moved there to the western part of Ukraine, hoping to get some calm and comfort there.
But today we also heard from the ICRC. They were claiming that one of those escape routes, this humanitarian corridor from Mariupol, was actually mined. And we also heard from the French Foreign Minister today. He called these humanitarian corridors a trap. Is there any way that these civilians can actually get out of harm's way?
Well, that's exactly it. And these are the people, some of them already tried to be evacuated recently over the past few days, and they couldn't. Some of them died there because of the shelling and not respecting the green corridors, the humanitarian corridors. Will they make another attempt, these people, to get evacuated? Definitely, because where they are now, in Mariupol particularly, without any connection, without electricity, not being able to get some food or water and supplies, and we're talking about families, we're talking about elderly, kids, they will try for sure, but that's the whole point, about trying to make it as secure as possible, and also to take these people from one Ukrainian city to another Ukrainian city, and not to cross the border to Russia or to Belarus.
Sasha Vakulina, thank you so much for that. Now, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has called for continued international cooperation during a meeting with his Dutch and Canadian counterparts. He's due to hold further talks with the leaders of France, Germany and the US later today. As sanctions on Russia drive up energy prices in Europe and further afield, Johnson said he would set out a new strategy which could see Britain producing more oil and gas, while Dutch leader Mark Rutte urged EU countries to adopt a step-by-step approach for weaning reliant countries off of Russian energy. The leaders stopped short of an outright ban on Russian oil and gas imports, but a plan was laid out to offer Ukraine further assistance in the fight against Russia.
This is the moment for Ukraine's friends to create a coalition of humanitarian, economic and defensive military support to ensure that Putin fails. And that's why today I'm announcing a further £175 million of UK aid for Ukraine, $100 million of which will be provided directly to the Ukrainian government.
And European Council President Charles Michel says EU leaders will discuss Ukraine's application to join the bloc on Thursday. But opinion is divided on allowing it to join. Currently, admitting a new member requires the approval of all EU member states. President Zelensky signed a decree applying to become a member last week in the face of the invasion of his country. Now, countries' representatives met in Brussels on this issue earlier. And for more of this, I'm now joined from Brussels live with our correspondent, Maeve McMahon. Maeve, so this discussion on whether or not Ukraine might become an EU member, that's going to take place later in the week. But will that actually make any kind of difference for Ukraine at this point in the war?
Good evening, Per. Well, that is a very good question, and it's one I just put to the head of the Ukrainian civil society, Elena Karbo, a little earlier today in Brussels, and she told me no. She said the idea of contemplating and discussing Ukraine's membership of the European Union is irrelevant right now. She said the priority for her country and for her people is stopping the war, saving their country and reducing the amount of deaths and casualties. She called on European allies to support by sending military aid and by introducing a no-fly zone. She said it would have been much more helpful to have this debate back in 2014 at the time that an association agreement was signed between Brussels and Kyiv. That said, she said it was comforting to see this debate taking place as well right now. The fact that it's being taken seriously, this will send a good symbol to her country, but a bit too late, as she said. But as we speak, indeed, ambassadors were contemplating it, and Charles Michel mentioned the idea of this Ukrainian membership when he spoke to Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, on the phone a little bit earlier. And remember, for the last couple of years, the European Union has been very careful not to make this matter a priority for them in order not to antagonise Vladimir Putin, because it's exactly EU membership and NATO membership for Ukraine that Putin never wanted to see.
And Maeve, we also have two other countries, Georgia and Moldova, who are also hoping to become EU members and moving closer to an EU membership in the coming days. I mean, would that offer any kind of further protection for example, Moldova, which is just on the other side of Odessa from those advancing Russian troops?
I mean, again, it's worth pointing out that the European Union is not a military power. It is just a soft power. It's been working hand in hand with NATO, with the military alliance for the last couple of weeks, and it's very much in favour of going down that line. But it is just a soft power. It's more about a single market. So the direct answer is no. But what this does very show is that Georgia and Moldova have pointed out very clearly that their future is in Europe and with their European allies and not with Russia. And earlier today, my colleague Sandor Ziros had the opportunity to speak to the Prime Minister of Moldova, and she made it very clear that her country was remaining neutral and did not seek membership with NATO, but she wanted to see her application for EU membership be taken very seriously. You can take a listen now to what she had to say.
Offering of candidate status would be a very important signal to the people of the countries that submitted the request to join the European Union, that they are welcomed in the free world. They are welcomed in a union where, democratic values and the rule of law and the respect of human rights, the respect of international law are fundamental principles.
And it's worth pointing out to our viewers that despite the ambitions of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, becoming a member of the European Union pair does not happen overnight. Countries need to fulfil what's called the Copenhagen criteria, which consists of 35 torturous chapters and rules and regulations that countries have to adhere to and reform. And many countries want to join the EU. They've been trying to, and they've been waiting in the backstage for many years. So this is obviously opening a huge can of worms.
And Maeve, soaring energy prices are also high on the European agenda these days, and especially European dependency on Russian oil and gas. Let's take a listen to see what Mark Rutte, the Dutch leader, had to say about this a little bit earlier today.
So we have to dramatically reduce our dependency on gas and oil from Russia. That will take time. A statement earlier today by Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, I think, was in the same direction. So the painful reality is there. And that means that we have to be very clear and make no mistakes here. This is a step-by-step approach, and that means that we have to make sure that the energy supplies in this part of the world, again, including Ukraine, but also in the rest of the world, are not hindered, and that will take time.
Now, obviously, high energy prices, that has a huge impact on the lives of all the European citizens. What are you hearing from Brussels about this and the European dependency on Russian oil and gas?
Well, it's a debate here every single day, and it's the reason we saw the Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi come to Brussels as well to discuss this issue today with his European counterparts. It's worth pointing out that we import 42% of our gas from Russia, and this debate about weaning off this dependency has been going on for years. But now, of course, it's become a priority. And we understand that the European Commission has a 10-point plan up their sleeve that they're planning to present imminently. And we understand that's focusing on implementing their Green Deal, focusing more on renewables and also shopping around for their gas. So looking to Qatar, looking to Algeria, looking to Norway, looking to the United States in order to not have to rely so much on Russia.
Maeve McMullen, thank you so much for that report live from Brussels. Now, the situation in Ukraine is becoming increasingly desperate for those civilians who remain in the country and are unable to flee. The government says that thousands of people are now without electricity, water, or heating. For more on this, I'm now joined by global affairs analyst Michael Buchurkov, who's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. You're now in Lviv. Talk to us about the situation there.
Good to be with you. Well, up until now, Lviv has been untouched, thankfully, also not too overwhelmed. But that has changed dramatically in the past 3 or 4 days, I would say, as the surge of people move from the east and the south towards here. For the most part, Lviv is kind of a transit point, but it's also a place where those who do have the means stay here. All of the hotels are booked out, private accommodation. The roads are absolutely clogged. But the city, which, by the way, is a UNESCO heritage site, it's the birthplace of Ukrainian nationalism. It's becoming more militarized, much more heavier law enforcement, soldiers, concrete barriers, tank traps, that sort of thing. And, the occasional air raid siren as well. So the city very much on edge.
Michael, we've seen reports about civilians being deliberately targeted by shelling. I mean, how is that changing the dynamics of this war?
Well, yes, and it's so sad. I mean, this is straight out of the Russia playbook, which, we've seen elsewhere in Syria, Chechnya. And the strategy is to encircle heavily populated urban areas, bomb them into submission, and also to push people out. I am starting to believe that with the surge of people going across the border, and remember, originally the upper estimate was 5 million, now they're talking about 10 million, almost a quarter of the Ukrainian population, that Mr. Putin and his circle are weaponizing migration, overburdening Europe with this migration. So a lot of the people I speak to, because this is a humanitarian hub as well, are saying, let's try as much as possible to keep vulnerable people within the borders of Ukraine. But frankly speaking, they have a long way to go in terms of, converting things like stadiums and other facilities to house these IDPs.
Michael, you're in Lviv. We have some trouble with the connection, but I hope you can still hear us and we can still hear you. Obviously, it's a difficult situation there on the ground. So far, the West has said no to imposing this no-fly zone over Ukraine that President Zelensky has been asking for. Are there any alternatives that the West can use to try and stop the killing of civilians?
Well, there's an immediate alternative that can be done, which presumably would not provoke the Kremlin as much as a no-fly zone, and that would be introducing a Berlin-style airlift to Lviv. Right now, what's happening is there's a big bottleneck at the Polish-Ukrainian border, all of those goods coming in. If there is a capability to fly goods in on presumably commercial aircraft from, say, Canada, US, and European capitals into Lviv, I think that would help alleviate a lot of the bottlenecks and reserve the border crossings more for people. From everyone I speak to, as much as the Ukrainians are begging for that no-fly zone, and I totally sympathize with them, and they're under incredible bombardment right now, I don't think Europe can muster the political will to do that. So let's get the conversation going on something like an air bridge that could bring supplies directly in here and help alleviate suffering immediately.
There are reports today as well that there will be a meeting between the Ukrainian and the Russian foreign minister later in the week. Do you see that as a sign that there might be some kind of opening in terms of a diplomatic solution?
Well, yes, until I heard what Mr. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, reiterated today, and basically the demands are for Ukraine to recognize Crimea, recognize the thugs in the occupied Donetsk and Luhansk so-called republics, and also to apparently agree to some kind of puppet prime minister. And also the other demand from the Russian side is no to any international blocs like NATO. None of these are anything any Ukrainian prime minister could possibly agree to. So talking is always good. I mean, the foreign ministers of the two countries haven't done that for quite some time, but the Russian side seems to be digging in its heels and putting forth conditions that can't possibly be accepted by Ukraine. And then the other quick thing also, this so-called humanitarian corridors that Russia agreed to for the third time, those conditions are also unacceptable. For example, asking people from Kiev to go through Belarus to other countries, totally unacceptable.
Michael Buchurkov, thank you so much for your insights there, live for us in Lviv. A growing number of tech companies have suspended operations in Russia in response to the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Netflix and TikTok are the latest to announce that they too will stop operating in the country as Moscow ramps up attempts to control that war narrative. Now, for more of this, here's Matthew in the Cube. Matthew?
Well, Per, in 2022, this war in Ukraine is being documented online as much as any recent conflict. This is at the same time a war of disinformation, propaganda and cyber attacks. A growing number of multinational companies have suspended operations in Russia following Western sanctions and global outrage over its invasion of Ukraine. And today, Netflix, the streaming giant, and TikTok, the popular social network, were the latest to do that. TikTok confirming that any users in Russia will not be able to upload videos or live streams, nor will they be able to watch videos that have been uploaded by users elsewhere. TikTok saying in this statement that the safety of their employees was a priority. And what they're referring to there is the Russian government's continued efforts to clamp down on what both citizens and media can say about the war in Ukraine. Facebook and Twitter have been blocked, while meanwhile on Friday, the Russian parliament approved a controversial new so-called fake news law. This law means that Russian citizens can be imprisoned for up to 15 years if they intentionally spread information about the country's military that the Kremlin deems fake. Now on top of this, Russia is also reportedly looking into trying to prevent and promote internet service providers from operating only in Russia, otherwise by Friday they will be shut down. Now, Moscow says that this move is to prevent cyber attacks on Russian soil, but at the same time, analysts say that this is an excuse Russia has rolled out previously when it wants to control the internet, much like China has done, for example, in their model. Now, on top of this, again, this move would only mean that independent media and voices in Russia are not able to break through the barrier and not able to document independently what is happening in the invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, we're also seeing this information war playing out in Ukraine, where the country's president has been uploading his own updates on social media. And recently, the country's Minister for Digital Transformation has been openly using Twitter to call on big tech companies to further take action against Russia. The latest of these was a letter to Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, a country that so far has not suspended its services in Russia. So, Per, at the same time as we're seeing Russian forces on the ground in Ukraine and shelling on Ukrainian citizens, it is also an online war of disinformation and propaganda as well.
Matthew in the Cube, thank you. And thank you so much for watching Euronews Tonight. We'll be right back with more news. Do stay with us.